You are aware. You've been aware for a while. You noticed the pattern. You recognized the cycle. You understood the reason. At some point, the realization arrived quietly, almost politely. It didn't shatter anything. It just made sense. And you assumed that was the turning point, that once you saw it clearly, things would move. But they didn't. The behavior stayed. The hesitation stayed. The same internal friction kept returning in different forms, and that creates a specific kind of confusion. Not ignorance, not denial, something more unsettling. The confusion of seeing clearly and still not changing. So the question forms, slowly. If I know what's happening, why does nothing actually shift? Awareness has been given a role it doesn't fulfill. It's treated like a lever, like insight automatically produces movement, like understanding is an act of power. But awareness doesn't push, it doesn't decide, it doesn't interrupt. It observes. An observation is passive by nature. You can watch something endlessly without altering it. You can describe a habit perfectly while continuing it. You can explain your avoidance while organizing your life around it. You can map your fears in detail and still protect them. Awareness doesn't dissolve patterns, it illuminates them. And illumination is not the same as disruption. Sometimes it makes the pattern more efficient, because now it has language, now it has justification. Now it sounds intentional. So awareness doesn't threaten the system, it often stabilizes it. What if awareness is not the beginning of change, but the beginning of coexistence? There is a subtle relief that comes with awareness. Not peace, relief. The relief of naming, of placing something inside a concept, of no longer feeling completely confused. Confusion is disorganizing. Awareness restores order. And order feels good. It feels like progress. But progress is not guaranteed, because order can also mean containment. Once something is understood, it becomes manageable. It no longer feels urgent. It no longer feels chaotic enough to demand interruption. So you live with it. I know why I do this. I see what's happening. I understand where it comes from. These statements create a sense of mastery, but mastery over explanation is not mastery over behavior. The system remains intact because the system was never dependent on ignorance. It was dependent on function. And awareness doesn't change what a system is designed to do. It just gives you a better view of it. So you stand there, looking, waiting, wondering why clarity hasn't changed anything. What if clarity was never meant to? There is also something comforting about awareness. It creates distance. You're no longer fully inside the experience. You're slightly above it, watching yourself feel, watching yourself react, watching yourself hesitate. This distance can feel like maturity, like emotional intelligence, but distance can also protect you from contact. Contact with the raw feeling, contact with the risk, contact with the part of you that would have to act instead of analyze. Awareness allows you to think about your pain without entering it, to understand your fear without confronting it, to observe your avoidance without challenging it. That can feel safe, especially if direct engagement once had consequences. So awareness becomes a compromise. You don't deny what's happening, but you don't disturb it either. You remain adjacent to your own life, close enough to comment, far enough to avoid responsibility. How much of your awareness is actually a way of staying one step removed? Awareness is often mistaken for honesty, but honesty is not just seeing, it's tolerating what you see without buffering it. Awareness, by contrast, can be buffered. You can intellectualize it,
You can aestheticize it. You can turn it into insight. You can say the right things about yourself while remaining untouched by their implications. That's why awareness often arrives without consequence, because it hasn't crossed into confrontation. And confrontation is destabilizing. It threatens identity. It disrupts routines. It creates loss. Awareness alone doesn't do that. It leaves everything structurally intact. It's a mirror, not a force. And mirrors don't move people. They just show them where they're standing. So the disappointment grows. You expected awareness to change you, but awareness is neutral.
It has no agenda. It doesn't care if you stay the same. It only cares that you see yourself staying the same. And that distinction matters more than most people realize. What if awareness is not failing you, but doing exactly what it's designed to do? There's another layer that's harder to admit. Sometimes awareness becomes part of the identity. I'm self-aware. I've done the work. I understand myself. These statements carry status. They imply depth. They imply growth. But they can also freeze movement. Because if awareness becomes who you are, change threatens that identity. If you've built a self-image around insight, then acting without certainty feels reckless, messy, uninformed. So you wait. You gather more understanding, more nuance, more context, until you're perfectly aware. Which never arrives, because complete awareness is a moving target. And while you're refining your understanding, life keeps repeating itself. Quietly, predictably. So awareness becomes a kind of ceiling, not because it limits you, but because you treat it as sufficient, as if knowing should be enough, as if naming the issue should resolve it. But naming does not equal renouncing. Understanding does not equal letting go. Seeing does not equal choosing. And awareness does not override the forces it reveals, it just makes them visible. If awareness has become your identity, what would you lose if it stopped being enough? There is a psychological economy at play. Every pattern exists because it serves something. It regulates, it protects, it preserves. Awareness doesn't remove that function, it doesn't replace it. So the pattern stays because the need stays. You can know exactly why you avoid something and still avoid it, because avoidance is doing its job. You can understand your defenses and still rely on them, because they are still preventing something you're not ready to face. Awareness doesn't cancel utility. It doesn't dismantle protection. It just explains it. And explanation is not persuasive enough to override survival logic. If a behavior once kept you safe, awareness alone will not convince your nervous system to abandon it. Especially if abandoning it introduces uncertainty, especially if the alternative has no proven safety. So the system chooses what it knows, even when you understand it, even when you resent it, because understanding doesn't rewrite emotional memory, it doesn't calm instinct, it doesn't negotiate with fear, it just narrates. So the pattern persists, and you begin to suspect something uncomfortable, that awareness might not be the catalyst, that something else has to shift first, something less elegant, less articulate, less controlled. And that realization is not reassuring. It removes the illusion that thinking your way out is possible. What part of you is relieved that awareness hasn't forced you to act yet? There is also grief hidden inside awareness. Grief for the time you've spent knowing and not moving, knowing and not choosing, knowing and staying. Awareness sharpens that grief because now you can't say you didn't see it. You saw it, you just didn't leave. And that creates a new tension between what you understand and what you continue to do. That tension can be unbearable, so the mind looks for ways to soften it. More reflection, more context, more reasons, more patience, anything to avoid the blunt truth.
that awareness alone doesn't cost you anything. It doesn't require loss. It doesn't demand sacrifice. It doesn't force a break with the familiar. So it's tolerated, encouraged even. But tolerated is not transformed. And deep down, you may already know this. You may feel the difference between insight and impact, between seeing and choosing, between understanding and standing somewhere else entirely. And the gap between those two keeps widening. What part of you is relieved that awareness hasn't forced you to act yet? Awareness does not dismantle identity, it observes it. It does not challenge loyalty, it explains it. It does not threaten continuity, it preserves it. That's why awareness can coexist with years of stagnation, because stagnation is often identity consistent, and identity consistency feels safe.
Even when it's painful, even when it's limiting, even when you know better, awareness doesn't override the need to remain recognizable to yourself. It doesn't disrupt the story you've been telling for years. It simply annotates it, adds footnotes, adds insight, adds depth, but leaves the narrative intact. So you become someone who understands their stuckness very well, someone who can articulate their patterns, their wounds, their fears, and still lives inside them. Because articulation is not renunciation, it's description, and description can be endlessly refined without anything changing. At some point, that becomes its own trap, not ignorance, sophistication, a sophisticated form of staying the same. If awareness has made you more articulate but not more free, what role is it really playing in your life? There is a quiet fear underneath all of this. Not fear of failure, fear of irreversibility. Because once something truly changes, you can't go back to innocence. You can't return to not knowing. You can't undo the consequences. Awareness keeps you in a reversible state. You can think, you can imagine, you can explore hypotheticals, but you don't cross the threshold. Crossing it would mean losing the option to remain who you are, and awareness alone never forces that loss. So it becomes a holding pattern, a place to stay while life waits, a way to feel engaged without being exposed, a way to be involved without being at risk. And as long as awareness feels productive, there is no pressure to leave it. Until something else happens, something that awareness can't manage, something that creates cost, loss, pain, collapse, fatigue, something that makes staying the same more expensive than changing. Awareness does not create that moment. Life does, and until then, awareness will continue to watch, calmly, intelligently, patiently, as you circle the same ground. So maybe the real question isn't why awareness hasn't changed anything. Maybe the question is why you expected it to, why you trusted understanding to do the work of disruption, why you believed seeing the truth would be enough to live differently. Because awareness never promised that. It never offered transformation. It only offered vision. And vision, on its own, is quiet, neutral, uncommitted. It leaves the decision exactly where it's always been, with you, standing where you are, seeing everything clearly, and still not moving. And if that's the case, what would actually have to happen for awareness to stop being a place you stay and start becoming something you can no longer hide inside?